Welcome to Feedback Fatigue. I'm Jake Hughes.
And I'm Katie Ritter.
Today is Season 1, Episode 3. We have Bobbi Steward, the CEO of Revyse, on the show. We're talking about what's the core purpose of your feedback engine. What's going on, Katie?
I'm very excited for this episode. Well, if we keep the intro in, I was going to say I'm wearing the OG t-shirt that we took our feedback fatigue photo shoot in.
That's the cover shot?
The cover shot.
No kidding. Me too. Look at that.
Yeah. The black,
I wear this shirt every day, so it keeps it simple.
Jake has 16 black t-shirts.
I did buy a fresh batch this week.
Where do you get them?
H&M.
Nice.
I was watching this video on why we're so tired as a society in the modern day.
Okay.
Which is a pretty hyperbolic concept, but
off
I feel fine, to be clear. But decision fatigue and removing things like dressing is one of those things. So I wear a lot of black t-shirts. I keep the look consistent on the show.
Do you lay out your clothes in the morning?
I do not.
I've started to do this because I'm now on the West Coast and working East Coast hours. So I don't want to fumble around.
Really, we're jumping right out of it.
But
yeah, Wideville gives you no breaks. Still got to be up and early.
Yeah, I'm at the desk by 6:15, and it's been really nice because I lay out my clothes the night before, and I know exactly what I'm wearing, and now I have my routine to get going in the morning, go make my coffee and sit at the desk. Whereas before I didn't lay out my clothes and I was just spending too much time fumbling around in the dark trying to figure out what I wanted to wear. So maybe I'll buy 10 green t-shirts then. Just keep it really consistent.
I like that idea.
Bobbi's the best. We have a great relationship with Bobbi, and she's really been a huge supporter of Wide Whale, and I'm so excited about what her and Ben are doing at Revyse.
I don't want to go so far as to say she's a dear friend, because that makes me sound like I'm 1,000 years old.
Yeah, you're 1,000.
Bobbi is great. What do you mean? Bobbi is great, and I feel like we owe her a debt of gratitude. At least I do, because
I do too.
Yeah, totally. We worked with her for a couple of years when she was at BH, and then she went off on her own. And she did some consulting with us, and it was this transformational period for me coming as a newer member of multifamily. It's like, in retrospect, pretty embarrassing how little I understood of what was going on. But without that foundation, it's just been so important for us to kind of take that next step.
Yeah, she's been instrumental. And now CEO at Revyse, and this is one of my favorite bios that I've read, so I want to read it. Bobbi, maybe it is the constant motion or the always evolving tech, but Bobbi says that her favorite thing about her work is that it's the perfect mashup of science and heart. With a few well-chosen words and a couple lines of code, you can change things. One part tech nerd, one part storyteller, Bobbi has worked in real estate technology for the last decade, partnering with startups, software vendors, marketplaces, and property management owners and operators to help renters find home buyers find a place to call home. As the CEO of Revyse, she's on a mission to bridge the gap between vendors and operators, making it easier to discover, buy, and manage the top-rated tech and tools for your teams. Dynamic.
CEO Bobbi. So when we talked to her, she had just gotten back from a public speaking engagement. Felt like kind of a high pressure boiler room type situation, which was out of her comfort zone. So we learned that experience and how she deals with public speaking now that she's the person at the head of the company and is responsible for raising money, selling, whatever you might need to do in that context as a CEO. And she gets into her leadership philosophy, creating a feedback culture with, what is the word she used? Just creating space in order to make those conversations productive. And we get into her strategies around feedback and then also dealing with vendors.
Yeah, I really liked this episode. It It's different than what we've been covering. It talks a little bit more about the broader themes of feedback, how to create a culture, like you said, Jake, within your organization, and as someone who is running an organization, how to take feedback as a CEO and create this environment where people are giving feedback, good and constructive, to get better and move the business forward. So some really good tips from Bobbi, and you can tell that Revyse is a tremendous place to work. So very excited for this one.
As always, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can find the podcast content and some short clip video content on widewell.com/feedback-fatigue. Follow Katie Ritter on LinkedIn for more video content. Season 1, Episode 3, Bobbi Steward.
Hi, Bobbi.
I made
Good morning, Bobbi. You ready?
You guys, you've got it dialed.
Yes. Is my video good, Katie?
Yes. Yeah. We recorded one and Jake had a 4-second delay on his voice, and then his facial expressions would react to, like, I could hear him laugh, and then it was just deadpan face, and I was
That's amazing. And you're like,
I was just
awkward.
battling through this. This is funny to watch, and then I would see him like light up 5 seconds later.
That's amazing.
It's much better
I
now.
love it.
This looks great.
Yeah, we had people would react so delayed to what I said. It's okay, I get it. Maybe I'm not the most engaging speaker here, but give me a little help. So it really dug into some deep insecurities last time, but thank goodness this is right.
That's amazing.
You're clear as day. Speaking of speakers, did you crush it?
Okay, so I did it. I went up on stage and I did it. I am so glad it's over. It was by far the most stressful career experience of my life. Like, there was so much pressure on 10 minutes. And I was like, wow, can I handle this? I graded myself a C.
I'm sure that's harsher than what it really was. Yeah, set the scene.
The
what
scene
was
for
the
us.
situation?
So the scene was, I was called down like 10 minutes before I was set to go on stage. And I stood by the back door, the door that leads directly onto the stage. And they introduced me and told the room to critique everything I was about to say, and then judge me and form their feedback. And then they opened the door to the back of the stage, and I walked up the stairs and was standing on a stage, elevated 6 feet in the air, in front of a room of 100 people, without ever having even seen the room before I walked on stage. Cold entry. The most cold entry of any public speaking situation I have ever
Brutal.
been in. Yeah, and not only was I super nervous, but I was also dehydrated, and my mouth was so dry. I was like, I'm never gonna get through this. But I did it, and I said everything I wanted to say, and then they did a on-the-spot Q&A right afterward, and I felt like I fielded the questions really well. So I did it, but man, I'm glad it's over. It was like intense.
What do you tell yourself that moment right before the stage? What's in your head? Are you doing anything backstage to calm yourself?
So yes and no. I try to focus on my opening 4 lines, because I know my habits. I'm like, if I can nail the first 4 sentences flawlessly, it calms my nervous system. And I get a boost of confidence. And I'm like, okay, if I can hit the first 4 lines, then I know that I can get through this. And I just repeat those to myself over and over before I go on stage. But also, my oldest, Fox, he is 5. I was asking him this week, I was like, give me some advice. What would you do if you had a really big situation? You had to go on stage and you had to speak in front of your whole school. What would you do? And he said, Mom, I know exactly what I would do. And I'm like, okay, buddy, hit me with it. And he goes, I would have fun. And I'm like,
Kids.
you know what?
They make it sound
Yes,
so
Nailed it.
easy.
at the end of the day, right? They make it, but I was like, you know what? Yes, that's it. Yes, 100%. This is a moment. This is a moment. And I'm going to look back and I'm going to be proud of myself for doing it. And I should just have fun. So I was trying to give myself that pep talk.
Yeah.
I was trying to picture his voice and say, you know what, Mom? Just have fun.
That's awesome.
It was not fun, but I got through it.
Have you done any other speaking events like that this year? Repetition and practice
So
helps, in my view.
I've done a couple of speaking events, solo, just me on stage, and then also panels at conferences. But typically, you're sitting in a few sessions before it's your turn to be the speaker, and so you get to watch other people do it. And so it takes a little bit of the surprise element away so that you're a little more calm when you walk on stage because you've been watching other people do the same thing.
Right.
And this is the first one where it was like, had no idea what I was walking into. I've never experienced that before, but I can check that off my bucket list.
That is congrats. Congrats
Thank
on
you.
that being in the rear view. I'm sure it feels good. That relief of when
Thank
it's
you.
over. Of, okay,
Yes.
I did it.
Yes.
And that was,
And then
sorry to interrupt.
interestingly enough, I got it. The purpose of it was to give me feedback, and immediately after tackling that challenge or that event, I got a ton of feedback on how I did, which was really nice to hear, and then also a little bit frightening.
Yeah. Was it feedback on Revyse or maybe both, or just hard or soft skill public speaking type feedback on you, which I guess that's hard. What type of feedback was it?
It was feedback on the message and the delivery of the message. Did it resonate?
Yep.
Did I hit on all of the important components? Was it translated in a way where the audience clearly understood in the first 2 minutes what I was there to say? And that's the hardest part, right? Storytelling is a skill.
Yep.
It is such a skill. And honing it over several years, it's still, I think you know when you get it right, but it's so hard to get it right.
So let's break
It's
it down
really
a little
hard.
bit. What's the structure of your pitch?
The structure of my pitch is opening with a story that is relatable. And so if you can set the stage about a situation or an event that most people in the room have experienced themselves, and so you're making that personal connection to say, I've been in your shoes and I've experienced this firsthand. And then part of it also is level setting, that I'm not here to tell you that I've solved all of the world's problems, but that I've made mistakes myself. And so what I'm setting out to do is to build something that aids the industry in getting better and innovating. So telling a story that level sets, that gives a little bit of personality, that helps connect you and humanize you, and then talking through how it applies to day business processes, the industry as a whole, really tying the story and the pain to the overarching issue or problem, and then talking about solutioning. And then at the very end, getting into product features and benefits, but really trying to frame why you're standing on stage and why it matters.
Telling is so key. I can relate to the feedback piece of it. Quick story. So when I was coaching, I had to do a 15-minute talk on what leadership meant to me. And it was just in front of other coaches. I was an assistant. And my now wife at the time, I had just started dating, and she was also an assistant. And I was practicing my speech, and it was 4 stories about each member of my family and why their qualities and how I take that. It was so bad. Like I practiced, it was the day before, I practiced in front of a bunch of coaches, and I almost started crying at one point because I was just like talking about my family. Like it was all over the map. And the other coaches had been like, oh, nice job, love the message, and left. And then my wife, Savannah, sat there. She was like, that was terrible. You got to do this 10 more times tonight. And you got to, and just that honest feedback. And then the next day, I nailed it. And my head coach at the time was like, that was like, I could tell that Savannah went back and was like, you need to do this over and over and over and over again and tweak this and this. And that was, she was like, that's when I knew that you guys would probably be together for a while. But it's just like, to get that type of feedback is, in the moment, I was like, oh God. But the repetition, it can help. But it was, yeah, I hear you.
Savannah is good for that. She'll tell it like it is.
That's amazing.
Did she give you feedback on the content, or was it just repetition? What did you work on that night?
It was a little bit the content, but it was mostly repetition. And I would do it, I would say it, and it would go well, and she was like, okay, again. Like it was full miracle, like drill sergeant, and again. Mm-hmm. And by the next day I had it, and I wasn't crying when I was doing it.
That's amazing.
So it was a repetition for sure. And so I'm curious, like if you, when you're going through all of this, were you repeating it to yourself out loud and leading up to this?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I used to abide by this philosophy that said you should practice 1 hour for every minute that you are on stage. And so if you're giving a 15-minute presentation, you should practice for 15 hours. I don't stick to that rigidly anymore because I've come up with a way to help myself memorize the key points, tying my slides visually to reminders in my brain to understand, okay, here are the key points that I wanted to say on this slide. I've gotten pretty good at that. So I don't have to abide by the 1 minute, 1 hour rule anymore. But what I do is once I've finished my pitch and I understand exactly what I want to say, I take a voice memo on my phone of myself delivering it, and then I listen to it on the flight on my way to wherever it is that I'm going to go and speak. And so I just subconsciously am hearing myself go through it over and over again. And then having it sit at that deeper level subconsciously helps me remember what it is I want to say on each slide.
That's awesome.
So as you're constructing the story, how are you taking external input? And this kind of starts to tie into what this show's all about with feedback. And so how are you taking feedback on your pitch? Because Revyse, you're at 14 months into this process. Is that right?
Yes.
14 months. Congrats. That's awesome. So 14 months in, you've been refining your pitch over this time, raised some money, building a team. Your job as CEO is to sell this in a lot of ways to all different types of constituents. How are you taking feedback and translating that into your presentation?
Yep. Every time we demo the product to a potential customer, every time we interview a new employee, I'm delivering the pitch. I'm delivering pieces of it, and I'm gauging feedback. Did it land? How much time did it take for the person I'm speaking with to connect with and understand what it was I was saying? And so I take little pieces of it every time I'm having a conversation about Revyse, so that I can test out what works, what doesn't, what do I need to switch, and then just tweaking that for the situation, for the audience, and for the expectations of the presentation. But it's constant. It's constant. It's interesting. I have one of the classic interview questions when you are interviewing for a management role or a leadership position is, what is your leadership style, right? Everyone always asks that. And so really early on in my career, I defined what my leadership style was. And it's a phrase that I use all the time, but the phrase is over-communicate always. And that has always been my MO, is just over-communicate always. And back in the day, I think it was 2012, I read this Harvard Business Review article, right? So classic. But it it stuck with me, and it has been one of the most impactful things that I have read in my career. And the article talked about the disconnect between the people who define the strategy at a company and the people who execute the strategy at a company. And it defined these two groups of people by framing up the fact that the people who set the strategy have full context. They get to know all of the information. And the people who execute on the strategy only get to know a small fragment of the information about the company, the finances, the strategy, its health. And it talked about that when only 5% of the people in an organization, only the executive leadership team knows the strategy and has all of the context, then only 5% of the company can execute on decisions that align with their work and the vision. And so it was basically making the case that if you are not transparent, how can you expect 95% of your workforce to all be rowing in the same direction? And that just clicked with me. And so I've always operated under the premise that people need full context. And so it's my job as a leader to set the stage and to give them all of the information, whether it's company health or feedback, so that they have the full context to make decisions autonomously to row in the same direction.
So at your previous role at BH as VP of Marketing, how did you take that strategy with you to BH, and how did that work in that context?
Yeah. We had recurring meetings, and there would be a section of the meeting. And it's so funny because I still do it here at Revyse. There's always a section of a weekly meeting where I say, okay, I'm just going to talk at you for a minute. And I jokingly say I'm going to talk at you because it's not, the team's not asking questions. It's just me just completely distilling everything in my brain. Okay, here's the context of what happened this week. Here's the situation. Here are the players. Here's the challenge. Here's what we're up against. When I say I'm just talking at you, I'm just providing the broader context so that you can understand, okay, where do I fit within that? Does that impact me? Is that going to change my resourcing, or should I reprioritize my top 3 based on that new information? And it's always just been something that I've done.
I love it. We do something similar at Widewell. We call it Visible, and it's every morning at 9:30, and Matt is basically doing that, just giving us context, giving us updates, telling us where we're rowing, the direction, to use your great analogy there. And I think so helpful about that clarity. First of all, it's just so helpful to know what are we doing here. And then when you do deliver feedback, when you do have to have those tough conversations, it becomes about the broader thing. It becomes about, hey, this is where we're going, and this is what we've talked about. And so when I'm delivering this harder feedback, it's not necessarily just about you. This is about this whole direction, and it becomes bigger than any one person. And I think that makes it easier to sometimes have these conversations. We've talked about this is where we're going, this is who we are, this is how we execute, and here's how you fit into that. And so it becomes the harder feedback becomes less personal, I think, when you do have that type of clarity and direction.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when it's tough feedback. You're spot on, Katie. If we have never had the conversation before, and this is coming out of left field or what feels like out of the blue, then the tendency is to internalize it a lot more and say, oh, this was my failure, instead of understanding the full context of, no, this is something the company's been working on because we recognize it as an area where we have room for improvement. And so it is so much easier to be transparent and to give feedback when it's a repetitive conversation and everyone has the full context. We at BH, we were really good about creating a culture of feedback, creating a culture of transparency, and the expectation that leadership would always communicate the why. And that was how we framed it at BH with the broader company, was understanding the why behind either a process change or an ask or delivery of feedback. It was knowing the motivation behind it, knowing the underlying drivers, and having the context so that it didn't feel personal. It was something that the company as a whole was working toward.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Jake, you look like you're about to ask a question.
Just to build on that, for me with my
Yeah.
team, and I'm a newer manager. This is the first, within the last 18 months, is the first team that I've ever managed. So I'm learning this stuff fresh. And for me, it's always been lately, if someone on my team does a bad job because they execute poorly, that's on them, and I'll give constructive feedback there. If they do a bad job because I didn't set the parameters of the project or explain it right, or they went off in their own direction, and it was different from what I had envisioned in my mind, then that's my mistake. And I need to start over and explain the project. And then next time, do a better job explaining what the expectations are up front so nobody's wasting their time.
Yeah, for sure. Being in management is tough. It's always a balance because there are always competing priorities, whether it's time or resources or opportunity. It's interesting. I think it also changes depending on where you sit in the company as well. One of the things I learned about being in middle management is that it really is a pressure chamber, right? You have the pressure from both sides. You've got the folks who are reporting to you, who are relying on you to make sure that you are giving them that context and leading them in the right direction. And then you also have the people above you who have expectations about the delivery or the function that you run, and being able to meet those expectations and to communicate, to manage up and communicate what you need and the health of your team. It's a really tough spot to be in. And then moving up into an executive level role where you no longer have that same top-down pressure, sometimes it can feel very uncomfortable to have a boundary is now missing and there's no backstop. The buck stops with me. And sometimes it can be really uncomfortable to be in that situation. And so having a peer group where you feel comfortable giving each other feedback in that same way can be so helpful and so transformative when you have that horizontal team who's willing to help provide the backstop and to give you that sense of boundary where you no longer have it, I think is one of the healthiest things that a company can do. So I always encourage people, even in new leadership roles, to develop a really strong relationship with your peers in a way where you feel comfortable giving each other feedback, so that it's not just vertical pressure, but that you've also got that horizontal checkpoint.
I'm curious, I think that's great advice. And I'm curious about, now we've got a good culture. We're giving feedback, taking action on that feedback, whether it's internal, company-wide, or from your clients, residents, your time at BH, but now at Revyse. I'm curious just how to start taking action around that. And if someone were to say, okay, I'm just starting out in this feedback-oriented, we've got a great culture, we're talking to each other, we're communicating, now what do we do to take action? What would your advice be to start?
Yeah. It's so much easier when you've created a culture that accepts and values feedback, where you've already built up that muscle of having the inputs, having the places to gather feedback, and then having the space to have discussions around what does that feedback mean. It's so much easier to then take action on it. And especially when it's uncomfortable feedback, right? It's really easy to take positive feedback and do something with it, to amplify it, to share it,
Yep.
to continue pushing in that direction. But when it's uncomfortable feedback, it's really hard to figure out what the best first step is. But when you have a culture that accepts, that has already built up the muscle of digesting feedback and taking action on it, it's so much easier. But I think one of the things that you can do if you don't already have that is just creating space to discuss it in a way where it's not, the intent is not to point fingers. The intent is not to challenge it, but it's to talk about the context of the hard feedback and just to create space to have that conversation. And I think once you do that, then action items naturally surface, because if you are honestly and authentically considering and digesting the information and the feedback, next steps tend to bubble to the surface anyway.
I think that it's just the same thing of setting expectations before. It's before you have a problem, there's the expectation that we are going to discuss critical feedback. I was reading this book this week on copywriting, and their whole theory behind the entire agency was they would put a piece of copy up on the wall, and then everyone in the entire office would try to poke at it and beat it up. And it was like, if you're going to work here, this is our process. Nothing is sacred. We're going to beat this down. Yeah. It's going to be hard. It's not going to feel great, but you'll get used to it, and the end result will be better, and you'll work towards ultimately a better result. We were talking to another connection within the multifamily industry this week, and she was talking about they have a retention committee. So you could almost have a feedback committee where there's 1 hour a month, set the expectation this is going to be an attempt to try to talk about the tough things and fix them.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. At Revyse, we've got a document called our Vivid Vision, where we basically wrote down what the company would look like 5 years from now. And it's our roadmap of, in a perfect world, if we were to be successful, this is what it would look like from a culture standpoint, from an office standpoint, from the way we work and the way that we interact with the industry. And one of the principles that we wrote down in that document was, if no one disagrees, then we didn't think through the problem well enough. If we all come out with the same conclusion, then we failed. Because there is something about allowing people to think around and under and through a problem or a piece of copy on the wall and pick at it, where it unlocks a different level of understanding, and it unlocks a different level of creativity and problem solving. To have a culture where you expect people to come up with unique and diverse ideas on things, and to really do the work of sorting through something before just taking the happy path. And so I love that. I think it is really important to make space for it, and then it's really important to tell people it's okay.
I agree. I love copy example too, because this has got to be, it's a repetition thing, and it's a practice, and it's a muscle that you flex. And in low stakes situations, that's where you're going to get the most reps. It's the quick paragraph of the blog post on the website. Is this groundbreaking? No. But then if we do this over and over in these lower stakes situations all throughout the organization, then the bigger decisions, it's just second nature, and you pick through it, and it's just who we are. And so I think this type of exercise I'm just thinking of how many layers are just in a multifamily organization. It can be across the whole organization. You can empower on-site teams to pick through a simple decision as where to put a QR code or where it can filter through everything. So I do think that lower stakes situations and repetition can really bring out that culture.
Definitely.
The other part of the story about the copy was that this agency was so confident in their process and their ability to produce, in this context, conversion is better. So higher conversion rate is more effective copy. They're so confident in their ability to execute on this that they used it in their advertising. They basically said, come with us, we'll be your best performing ad by 50% or something. And if we don't, you don't pay us. So they were willing to take this process that they had enough confidence in the strategy to differentiate themselves to sell their own product.
Yeah.
So it rippled out in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah. Put your money where your mouth is. I think that's a really important principle too. Being willing to take feedback to all areas of the organization, not just downward feedback, but also being open and willing to take feedback upward too. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of folks have experience with 360 feedback reviews where someone in management will have their supervisor, their peers, and their direct reports submit feedback on how they're doing to try to give a more holistic perspective on performance and areas of opportunity. And those can be really tough. Those can be very hard because by nature you feel vulnerable, right? You're asking people to critique you and what you've done and how you've contributed. It can be super hard. But I think that just giving people permission to deliver feedback upward can be really powerful too, as long as you act on it. One thing that is the cautionary tale is don't pretend to be open to feedback if you're not going to follow through, because it can be really disenchanting as a team member to constantly provide feedback and never see any action taken on it, never see any fruits of your labor, to feel dismissed. When feedback feels dismissed, it can be very detrimental to an organization.
And presumably residents will feel the same way if they're reviewing your communities and you're not doing anything about it. So does this mean that PMC should start reviewing residents too, so that they can get their spot at the table?
Feedback.
I mean, what's fair is fair, right?
I think let's think through that one. We'll think up and down and around and through that one and come up with the best idea. But 100%, I think that it's the small steps forward. You may know the stat, but when a review has been responded to, when it feels as though action has been taken and someone has acknowledged the feedback that's been delivered, it is significantly more powerful than reviews that aren't responded to.
Yeah, totally. And there's also a Harvard business study on this exact phenomenon of...
We too started with the Harvard business.
We too read an article. And they talked about they used hotel groups and TripAdvisor, and one group was responding and one group was not. And the group that was responding to reviews, their ratings were better, and they actually got more reviews because people just didn't feel like they were shouting into an echo chamber and went off and just nothing was being heard. That validation is so important. I'm thinking about responses. You respond, and if it's a common theme, let's say, I don't know, it's broken or something's going on, responding in those responses saying, hear you, the fix is coming, this should be done by here, here's our plan. And I think laying that out, if you have it, if it's appropriate, is so important in those responses because A, the resident knows what's coming, and B, everyone else reading that is okay. We know something's going to go wrong. It's okay. But they're on it, and they've heard me. And anyone just wants to be heard. Did this reach
absolutely.
anyone?
Absolutely. It's interesting. I've got a situation right now where I have purchased software from a vendor, and it's not going well. It doesn't seem to be as advertised.
Okay.
And I was fine with it. I was working my way through it. We were going to make it work. We had spent a lot of time trying to customize it for our situation. But I ran into an issue. It was a blocker. And I reached out to the support team and didn't get a response. And then a week later, I reached out again to the support team and copied my account manager and didn't get a response. And this went on for 5 weeks that I continued to reach out and never got a response. And so thinking back through my toolkit, I was like, okay, what can I do? What tools do I have to try to make something happen here? And so I reached out to the account manager and I said, hey, I've started reading all of your reviews online. I've read your Google reviews. I've read your G2 reviews. I've read your Better Business Bureau reviews. And I've seen that a lot of people have had the same issue that I've had. And it really concerns me. I'd like some help. And they responded immediately. Because they knew that public feedback was a really powerful thing. And so while it remained isolated to just my concerns, there was no response. But as soon as I surfaced the idea of public feedback, I got an immediate response, which was fantastic to finally be able to reach out to someone. But it was also really disheartening to know that was the motivation.
And when you reference other people and other people looking on or someone watching, it's the immediate response, but just the one-on-one behind the scenes interactions isn't getting. That is frustrating. Yeah. But brilliant idea, by the way. Speaking of your toolkit, that's awesome.
That always shocks me.
It's a great mission. I'm shocked too.
Vendor side note here. That's been a huge value prop for us. The fact that Wide Whale is just responsive and is helpful is oddly differentiating, and I'm sure something Revyse is taking note of.
People want to do business with people. You want to feel as a brand is humanized and that you have a point of contact. And the expectations are very low. People don't expect things to work perfectly. Yeah. People don't expect to have 0 software bugs or delays or implementation challenges, right? We all understand that technology is hard. But people just want to know that there's someone looking out for them and someone who cares about their business. And it sounds so soft skills, but it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, and we can start to wrap this up. We've kept you for a long time. This has been great conversation. But I'm curious, we've started talking about your pitch and Revyse, and I'm curious how much feedback played into your decision to start Revyse, to feature reviews, to feature that transparency. Was there like a moment where you were like, oh my gosh, we need like this? Was there a pivotal kind of moment in whether your time at BH or before that you were like, this needs to happen?
It's so interesting because it really does go back to the leadership philosophy that I've adopted of over communicate always, right? And as a software buyer, when I was an operator, I wished that there was this level of transparency, not only in the buying process of vetting new technologies and potential vendors and solutions in the market, but then also having the ability to connect with my peers and understand what their experience was like. And then in addition to that, having more transparency over my own vendor ecosystem to be able to track and manage what was happening with my tools and my requests and my agreements and my support tickets, and to be able to keep all of that in one system so that the entire organization had full transparency and visibility into all of the partners that we were doing business with. It was such a motivator because I had wished that I had all of this context. And so Revyse really is the tangible output of my desire for full transparency and feedback in the industry, to have a place where people can go and shop and get things done on their own time. And there was actually a scenario when I was on the operator side that really catalyzed the idea in my head. Was when we were shopping for a new technology vendor for a really core component of our customer experience and marketing program. And when we decided to go out, we didn't take the decision lightly, but we decided to go out for RFP, which we knew was going to be a huge amount of work, and it was going to be a months-long process. But we knew that this was a really critical purchase for us. And so we went out for RFP, and I had a team working on the project, about 6 of us at that time. And we said, okay, what companies do we want to request information from? And we all looked at each other and we were like, I've no idea. Where do we even start? Who's out there? Who's available? And we Googled it. And we were just scrolling through pages and pages of Google, trying to figure out what our options were. And when we got to these companies' websites, we submitted contact forms. Hi, I'm from a multifamily operator. I'm looking for a product like yours. Can you tell me about it? And less than 25% of the companies that we reached out to responded. We submitted dozens of contact forms on websites that were never responded to. And we went through a 4-month-long RFP process and never heard from those companies. A few we even sent LinkedIn messages to random people who we were connected with and didn't hear back. And so even the process of proactively trying to get a vendor to give us information about their product was unsuccessful. And so it was at that point where I think I was like, you know what, someone's got to solve for this. And then 2 years later, that someone happened to be us. So
awesome.
I think we'll end
Love
it
it.
there. Thank you. Bobbi Steward is the CEO of Revyse. Thanks for being on today.
thank you so much, Katie and Jake.